Welcome to A-Team Group's RegTech Summit Virtual Event 2020. We'd like to thank our platinum sponsors, SmartStream and Bureau van Dijk, our gold sponsors, the Derivatives Service Bureau, ACA Compliance Group, AWS Partner Network, Axiom SL, Capitec, Univista, Automated Intelligence, and Flamin KYC Software, and our event partner, the UK Department for International Trade. Connect with your peers on the networking page, and if you have questions for our speakers, please use the comment function next to the live stream. Thank you for attending and enjoy the session.
Hello and welcome to day 3 of our RegTech Summit Virtual. My name is Andrew Delaney. I'm President and Chief Content Officer at A-Team Group. And once again, I'll be the host for today. Today's theme is mostly around regulatory reporting, with a few other goodies thrown in. So let me just go through quickly the agenda for today's live stream, because we've got quite a mixed view. Firstly, we'll be hearing from Anthony Philipson. Anthony is Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for North America, and he's Consul General based in New York, and he'll be offering some insight into the future of transatlantic regulatory cooperation in the post-Brexit environment. And this very much follows on from our session yesterday of Brexit and what it holds in store for us as we go into, or should I say, out of the transition period and into the real world, the brave new world of Brexit. After Anthony's presentation, we'll hear a 1-minute startup elevator pitch from ISIN to LEI. Then at around 25 past the hour, I will be hosting a panel, a power panel no less, on regulatory reporting, an ongoing challenge that many of our readers and viewers continue to wrestle with. After the panel, we'll have another of our fireside chats. This one will be continuing with the reg reporting theme and is with Matt Vincent of Univista. I very much enjoyed our fireside chat yesterday with Beata Born of UBS Wealth Management around the topic of ESG. And if you missed that, you really should make sure that you catch the recording, which is available through the platform. And then back to the agenda, we will have, to round out the day, we'll have a joint presentation from ESMA and Glyph. And they'll be talking about the new European single electronic format and what that means for our marketplace. So that's the lineup for today's session. As I mentioned, all sessions are recorded. They'll be available once through the platform once the final session ends today. And they'll be available, all days recordings will be available through to the close of play on Friday. So you will remember, this is day 3 of 5 days of our RegTech Summit. And hopefully there's something for everybody to enjoy from the event. So let's see, a couple of housekeeping points before we move on with the agenda. We are using Slido to ask questions and to vote in polls. If you want to participate, get Slido onto your phone. I think there's a way to do that on the platform here, and you can ask questions anonymously, and you can also take part in the periodic polls that we will be running during the panel sessions. As usual, I urge you to visit the networking and sponsors section. It's my mantra in live events and in virtual events that it is the sponsors who make events like this possible. So please do go check out their wares. There's a few prizes up for grabs, vouchers, tablets and other things. So if you have to be in it to win it, as they say. So go ahead, get involved, and please do check out what they've got to offer. And let's see. Final point is, to really, I'd like to single out today's sponsors: Axiom SL, AWS, Derivative Service Bureau, and Univista. Again, without their support, we wouldn't be here today. So enough from me, I think. Let's welcome Anthony Philipson. As I mentioned, Anthony is Trade Commissioner for North America and Consul General in New York. He was announced as Trade Commissioner for North America in February 2018. He became Her Majesty's Consul General in New York in November 2017. Held a number of posts in the government, in the UK government, that is. Previous roles have included Principal Private Secretary to the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, and he's also been Councillor at the Embassy in Washington and the Prime Minister's Private Secretary for Foreign Affairs. It's quite a lot there, Anthony. Anyway, listen, thank you, welcome, and I'm going to hand over to you for your keynote on Brexit and what it means for regulatory cooperation going forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Andrew, and thank you to the A-Team group for the chance to join this this summit. I've had a look at the rest of the programme. It looks an absolutely fantastic agenda with some great speakers, and I'm delighted to have the chance to join you. And good morning, as I say, from a suddenly very chilly New York. So the UK has been at the centre of financial services for centuries, with London having the highest concentration of financial firms globally. Slightly over a decade ago, the world was transformed by a technological revolution with the emergence of digital innovations challenging the incumbents. This is, I think, particularly true in financial services, not least after the 2008 financial crisis, with a surge in demand to transform the way that consumers bank, invest, insure and pay. And that in turn created a new need for technology to manage compliance, both the result of new post-crisis regulation like MiFID II, as well as the development of new and innovative ways of doing business, which challenged the regulatory framework. And this combination of factors led to a rise in RegTech, particularly in the UK. In fact, our assessment is that about 2/3 of all RegTechs are either headquartered in the UK or maintain some form of presence, making this subsection of fintech a critical part of the UK government's push for innovation. We believe that London is simply leading the revolution as the global hub for fintech and innovation, with a melting pot of creative opportunities, technological demand, talent, and an existing financial services ecosystem that is unparalleled by the cities. Additionally, the industry has been backed with the full support and investment of government, the financial regulator, the FCA, who were one of the first actually to use the term RegTech, as well as industry associations. Pursuing opportunities for the UK in this space is a particular priority for us here in North America. The FinTech State of the Nation report identified over 1,600 fintechs across the UK, and we anticipate this number will double in the next decade. And in the next 5 years, incumbent and fintech partnerships are expected to rise significantly. The EY 2019 UK FinTech Census showed that fintechs across the UK are looking over at North America to establish or grow their operations, with already 41% of the 200+ respondents currently having an existing presence here in the US. That's not surprising, of course. The US has the largest financial services market in the world, and our two economies between us represent over 41% of global financial services exports, and the US is the UK's largest net financial services export market. Expanding operations to the US can facilitate capital raising efforts, providing access to one of the world's deepest talent pools and creating significant market opportunity through its consumer base and the availability of venture capital, with over $16.3 billion invested in fintech in 2019. As in other sectors, COVID has, of course, had a profound impact on the way that we do business and business itself. It's an ongoing pandemic. It's an ongoing economic crisis with terrible human as well as economic costs. But these last few months have also shown how resilient the fintech ecosystem is, and especially for RegTech. It's presented a host of new opportunities as companies across all industries are grappling with new working methods and new ways of doing business. RegTech firms are helping companies combat new COVID-inspired fraud scams and anti-money laundering techniques. They're helping companies respond to social distancing measures with virtual onboarding and know your customer checks. And they're also assisting firms with remote compliance and supervision. The question that we need to address in partnership with the industry is how to build on this incredible platform and create future economic opportunity for firms across the United Kingdom. And I'd just like to highlight 3 strands of work that we're pursuing. The first is the ongoing negotiation of a comprehensive free trade agreement between the UK and the US. We've held 5 formal rounds of negotiation since we launched in May, and we've made some significant progress. We haven't quite got this across the finish line, but that's because this is a major, comprehensive, substantive free trade agreement between the 1st and 5th biggest economies in the world, so it's no small undertaking. In particular, we've made real progress on digital. As 2 of the world's most advanced economies, the UK and the US need to benefit from cutting-edge digital provisions, which maximize opportunities for digital trade across all parts of our economies. Both countries have committed to having an ambitious digital chapter and future-proofing a trade agreement in anticipation of rapid technological developments in the industries of the future, not just in financial services. The UK is, of course, a major services exporter, and more than 2/3 of all of our services exports, worth over $250 billion, were delivered digitally in 2018. More than $60 billion of those exports went to the US. There's also a particular focus in the FTA on SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. Both the UK and the US are committed to signing an FTA that benefits all types of businesses, but especially SMEs. 87% of UK businesses exporting to the US and 81% of the businesses importing from the US are SMEs. These businesses are the backbone of our economies, and ambitious SMEs can benefit from measures relating to improved digital trade. We also believe that an FTA will help the financial services sector by lowering barriers and levelling the playing field, providing greater certainty by locking in currently applied levels of market access, reducing costs of regulatory alignment, and creating greater transparency to reduce compliance costs. During the 2nd and 3rd rounds of negotiation, negotiators on both sides underline the importance of high ambition on services, with financial services particularly vital to any final agreement. Finally, on the FTA, we've also set out in our negotiating objectives that we published in March this year, our ambition to agree something on business mobility, recognising the special relationship that the UK and US share not only economically, but also culturally and politically. Many Americans have made the UK their home, and British citizens live and work throughout all 50 US states. And we want to find ways to enhance mobility between our 2 economies in support of business activity. You will, of course, have noticed that there's been a small election here in the US, and we are now in the process of transitioning to a new president who will take office in January. That is going to probably involve a bit of a hiatus on the FTA track as the administration changes over. But as the Secretary of State, Liz Truss, said this morning in a speech in London, we remain fully committed to engaging the existing administration while they remain in office and gearing up to engage the new administration when they enter office. We believe that an FTA has bipartisan support. We are working to a set of US negotiating objectives that are set out in what's called Trade Promotion Authority that is agreed by both parties in Congress. And we believe that an FTA can be part of both the UK and US, not only ambition, but imperative to build back better from the COVID crisis. The second strand of work I want to highlight is our focus on transatlantic regulatory cooperation. In April 2018, the UK and US Treasuries announced a new financial regulatory working group. This was formed to deepen bilateral regulatory cooperation with a view to the further promotion of financial stability, investor protection, fair, orderly and efficient markets, and capital formation in both jurisdictions. The UK and US held the 3rd meeting of this working group virtually on October the 20th this year. This was the first working group meeting since the UK left the EU at the end of January this year. Participants included officials and senior staff from the US Department of Treasury and the UK Treasury, and from the US and UK independent regulatory agencies, including the boards of governors of the Federal Reserve System, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Bank of England, and the Financial Conduct Authority. The working group meeting focused on 5 key themes. First, the economic response to and the potential financial stability impacts of the COVID crisis. Second, international cooperation and 2021 priorities. Third, we covered cross-border rules and overseas recognition, equivalence and substituted compliance regimes. Fourth was sustainable finance, and fifth, but by no means least, financial innovation. Participants at the meeting welcomed the announcement of the signing of a memorandum of understanding between the Bank of England and CFTC regarding supervisory cooperation in relation to the UK and the US. And the third and final work strand I wanted to cover actually flowed from a meeting of the working group last year, where we announced a UK-US financial innovation partnership. This was created to build on and to deepen bilateral engagement on emerging trends in financial services innovation between the US and the UK. The partnership encourages collaboration in the private sector for commercial engagement and sharing information about regulatory practices with relevant regulatory bodies, all with the aim of promoting growth and innovation across our markets. The Department for International Trade network here in the US is holding a series of virtual events to promote the commercial element of the Financial Innovation Partnership centered around the Lendit FinTech USA conference. And I'm also delighted to say that today we're opening applications for UK RegTechs to apply for a virtual tour of the US market in February 2021. Successful applicants will spend a week learning about the US market from industry leaders and meeting directly with corporate innovation and compliance teams. We're looking for growth stage RegTechs who can service the US market and would also like to hear from US financial services firms on solutions that interest them. More information can be found on the Virtual Summit website, as well as in the RegTech Insights newsletter, or please do reach out to us here at DIT. In short, supporting UK firms and the RegTech and the wider FinTech and financial services space is a huge priority for the UK teams here in the US, as is continuing to attract investment into all parts of the UK. And I hope you will let us know how we can help you succeed and grow. Let me end just by saying a few words about the UK-EU track as we complete, as Andrew said, are leaving the transition period at the end of this year. This is a live process. The negotiations between the UK and the EU for a possible free trade agreement are ongoing as we speak in Brussels. Alongside that, though, there is also important work to establish a predictable, transparent, business-friendly environment for cross-border financial services business. We are looking alongside the FTA to negotiate equivalence assessments at the same time as we establish our regulatory autonomy. We believe that the UK has exceptionally high standards in this space of regulation and supervisory oversight. So we don't believe that equivalence should be complicated. It should be straightforward as we start with the same regulations, and as the UK in many areas has higher standards of regulation than our EU partners. So as I say, that is an ongoing process. It will play out over the next few days and weeks, but we are committed to ensuring, as I say, that predictable, transparent, cross-border business environment with the EU at the same time as we build our new partnership with the US and indeed with other parts of the global economy, all with a view to identifying, establishing and then capturing business opportunity for UK firms across the whole country. Thank you very much indeed for the chance to talk to you today, and I'd be delighted to take any questions in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. We've already had a few questions come in on Slido. A couple are quite general. I'll come to those in a second, but I think a couple of them pick up on some of the points you made later in your presentation, certainly around cooperation and the like. So the first question from the audience: are there avenues for financial services firms to get more involved with the various working groups and partnerships around regulation and the FTA?
So I think the simple answer is yes. Around the FTA itself, the Department for International Trade, working with other government departments, including, of course, the Treasury, have set up a series of trade advisory groups. I can't honestly tell you off the top of my head who is on those, but we are also doing a lot of work with British American business and with the US Chamber out here to tell people what's happening within the FTA and to make sure that there is a strong sort of two-way communication between industry and the negotiating process. I think the other point I would highlight is that I should have mentioned in my remarks that another key partner within the regulatory working group are the industry associations like City UK, because we want to make sure that that is also very joined up to the industry. And then I think the final point I would highlight is in terms of our broader approach to economic policymaking and regulatory regulation setting in this space. I think over the last few years, we've seen a very strong commitment from the government to creating a partnership between the private sector, the public sector, and indeed academia, as we look for sources of innovation and as we look to make sure that we get the balance right between regulation and innovation. And I think if we look at some of the successes, I would say, that we've had with things like the FinTech regulatory sandbox, that again has been a conversation involving the industry as well as the public sector and the regulators. And I think it's really important that we keep that dialogue going. At the end of the day, this is about helping business do more business. So we must make sure that they're part of the conversation.
Very good. One of the questions coming in relates to jurisdictional cooperation. What do you see as potential barriers to more jurisdictional cooperation on regulation, and what impact could they have?
I think there's two thoughts I would offer. One is, I think there's always going to be a sense that each jurisdiction will want to make sure that it is able to understand what is happening within its jurisdiction. I think, again, if we go back over previous processes where we've looked to identify opportunities for transatlantic cooperation, including in the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership talks that ran from around 2013 until about 2018, those ran into some real issues about just the number of regulators, frankly, on each side of the Atlantic, who would want to have a say in how you bring those senses of how you give each other confidence that they can still understand what and control what is happening within their jurisdiction. Because I think, again, this might sound oversimplistic, but the risk that is posed by something going wrong within the financial services sectors, I mean, we've seen it. And I think regulators are going to be instinctively cautious, and I think that's understandable. But I think as we look at, if I flip that round then, if we look at the development, and as I say, both in the RegTech and the FinTech space generally, the opportunities that technology brings to drive innovation, to find more efficient ways of doing business, to establish more direct connections between firms and customers, which I think has then been accelerated through the COVID crisis as we've all moved into an online virtual world. I think actually, I would say that that sort of sense of jurisdictional cooperation has held up pretty well. And I think we need to take that momentum and build it into the regulatory working group, the Financial Innovation Partnership, and see how we can keep getting that balance right between regulators, as I say, wanting to feel they know what's going on, but how we create the necessary connections between them to give them that confidence through whether it's mutual recognition agreements or broader MOUs, et cetera. Final thought, I mean, the US, of course, is not a single market when it comes to financial services. The regulatory working group is government to government, federal to national. We need to really make sure that we're also building relationships with state level regulators, including in this space. And that, again, just makes for quite a sort of complex web. But I think if we can stay focused on the opportunity and then the conversations that we need to set up to realize that opportunity is probably the best way into it. Very
good. And we are running out of time. So final question, this is probably one I'm sure you saw coming. It's about what an FTA might look like in a Joe Biden environment. Joe Biden has been critical of the UK's decision to leave the EU. So is an FTA even possible? An audience member asks.
So yes, I think it is. And the early contacts that we've had, which are necessarily not substantive. The principle in the US is that there's only one administration at a time, and Joe Biden won't take office until January the 20th. But the Prime Minister had a good call with him over the weekend after it was confirmed that he announced that he had won. They did talk about the FTA. We are very well aware of their views, not only, I mean, I think I would say that actually their views on Brexit, we're aware of them, but Brexit has happened. It's done. We are very aware of their views about the importance of protecting the gains of the Northern Ireland peace process and not risking any disruption to the border in Ireland or between Northern Ireland and the Republic. But that again is a firm commitment and oft-stated commitment from the UK government. And then the final point I think I would make is, as I touched on in my remarks, there is bipartisan support here for a free trade agreement. We do believe that a free trade agreement between our two countries would help with economic recovery from the COVID crisis, would help us to, actually both Prime Ministers, the Prime Minister and President-elect Biden, interestingly, used the same phrase of building back better. And we want to make the FTA part of that process. So, as I say, we will gear up to engage with them substantively as fast as we can after they take office. But we are confident that there is something for the FTA to offer both countries as we go forward.
Very good. Anthony, thank you very much. Certainly speaking as an SME with a very transatlantic footprint. I spent 20 years in New York myself. This is an area of particular interest to us at A-Team. We'll be watching it closely. I really appreciate you coming on to tell us all about progress. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Good luck for the rest of the summit.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, let's move on. Next up, as promised, we will have a short interlude in terms of a RegTech startup elevator pitch from ISIN to LEI. So let's watch the video.
ISIN 2LEI is the RegTech open data expert. We link open data sources and provide financial instrument and legal entity data. Our focus is on the main objectives of RegTech: transparency, consistency, and high-level data at low cost. Open data sources are our primary source, but we also do data enrichments ourselves to provide full-scope datasets to our clients. Our mission is to provide data that is ready to use and easy to access, via our web portal, API or customized data formats.
Great, thank you. So thanks to ISIN 2LEI, you can follow up with them, set up a virtual meeting or a chat with John Hull, who is attending the event. So look out for John. If that's something that interests you, please reach out to him and set something up. Okay, we're now joined by our next panel, which will be focusing on regulatory reporting, global updates and changes. Is your firm ready, and how can RegTech help improve efficiency? And I'm sure we know it can. So as our panelists join, let me just run through who we've got today. I will be moderating this session. I'll be joined by Joshua Beaton of Morgan Stanley, Adam Turnbull of Goldman Sachs, Malavika Solanki, sorry, Malavika, I'm tripping over my tongue this morning, of Derivatives Service Bureau, John McDonald of AWS, and Hari Chopra of Axiom SL. Welcome all. Perhaps we can start by asking each of you to briefly just give us a bit of background on yourselves, what your interest is in this space, and you know, what you're bringing to the table today. So let's start with you, Joshua.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. So Josh Beaton, Morgan Stanley. I run our North America Trade and Transaction Reporting Group. I'm a practitioner of these things, and so you know, my group builds and then runs these things, and I have been doing so for a long time. And so I'm in the middle of C and CAT and lots of other things, and so I'm really interested in this topic, and hopefully you know, bring some experience to bear.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Adam.
Hi, I'm Adam Turnbull from Goldman Sachs. Like Josh, I'm a practitioner as well. I co-run our regulatory engineering team here at Goldman. So we're responsible for all the non-financial reporting that the firm does. From my seat, I'm based in London. I'm probably more focused on the European and the Asian side of the house in terms of the regulations that we cover. My background was actually, I spent nearly 20 years in upstairs, if you like, in equities, working with traders, and then hopped over into regulatory reporting shortly after MiFID went live.
Very good, thank you. Malavika.
I am Malavika Solanki from the Derivatives Service Bureau. I sat on both sides of the fence, having started out as a practitioner doing regulatory reporting, and then spent some time in the clearing world, and more recently now in the data space around OTC derivative clearing. So long-standing interest in the topic. And what I do for the DSB is that I'm part of the management team at the institution, with a focus particularly on stakeholder engagement.
Thank you very much. John.
Hi, well, great to be here. So I'm John McDonald. I'm the head of our governance, risk, and compliance strategy group at Amazon Web Services, focused on our financial services customers. So my team's focus is really on enabling all of our customers and partners to be able to utilize the cloud to enhance, expand, and improve their regulatory reporting, and providing all of the compliance requirements and all of the background audits and certifications, and helping customers go through even regulatory approval, to be able to address their movement to the cloud as part of their evolution of their reporting requirements.
Very good, thank you. Finally, Harry. Harry, if people missed the session on day one, they won't know, but Harry joined us from a kind of outside broadcast on day one. We loved your background there, Harry. Where were you? Where did you join us from the other day?
Well, we had a little storm, and the power and the electricity was out, so I had to be out in the park.
He won first prize for the background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Harry, for people who didn't hear that session.
Sure. So I'm with AxiomSL, and we are involved in regulatory reporting across the financial services spectrum. And the topic that we are going to be discussing today is really, we started with a series of commodity traders in the trade and transaction reporting space, and we find that we're increasingly talking to the financial institutions as well to do this work. So I look forward to a really good discussion.
Excellent, thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. We're going to kick things off with an audience poll. This just is a device to make sure that the audience is awake and with us. And we also get to test out a lovely platform and see if the Slido works. So using Slido on your phone or wherever else you may have it, please go to the first poll question, and that is, to what extent has your firm managed to implement a holistic approach to regulatory reporting? And the options are, is it completely, mostly, partly, or not at all? So again, to vote on this poll, go to Slido on the right side of your video box on the screen, and you can click on polls, cast your vote, and we'll come back to the results in a second. While you are voting, I'm going to start off the panel discussion. First question, which will go to Josh, I think. So Josh, what do you see as the key functional challenges for those seeking to implement solutions to the wide range of regulatory reporting requirements they face?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it really is a wide range of regulatory reporting requirements. Over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of in Europe. Last year, this year, the upcoming years, there's going to be a little bit more focus in the US. It's really global, and it's just a growing function any way you look at it. I think the biggest challenge, at least the way that I look at it, is how you're organized. I think that when regulatory reporting sort of kicked off in anger post Dodd-Frank about 10 years ago, there were a number of firms who tried to do this off the side of the desk, right? They took existing middle office teams and said, hey, can you look at this too, when you're done with your regular stuff. And I don't think that worked very well. And so what I've been seeing over the last couple of years is the creation of dedicated regulatory reporting teams. And the question is, who's in that regulatory reporting team, and how are they organized? How do you function effectively across technology and operations and compliance? How do you do complicated things like data lineage? How do you know how can you tick and tie between all of your requirements and the code and the testing versus the actual regulations themselves? And then how do you do this, several dozen times across the globe? And then how do you pay for all of this, of course? Regulatory reporting is a tax. We need to be as efficient about it as we can, which I suppose is why we're here. And then, the ultimate question, which I'll leave for some other people on the panel, is, what technology do you have to support this, and how can you do so in a holistic manner? So it's really a multi-headed problem, and it's one that requires, I think, a ton of focus, and one that just keeps growing and growing.
It's certainly one that's captured a lot of attention among our readership for sure this year, over the past year or so, perhaps a bit longer. Harry, how do you see things?
I think it's very much to what Josh is talking about. From the work that we do, we think it's three big elements. One is you got to have a data dictionary that captures all of the elements you have to report against, and that forces different parts of data streams to come together to one place. That's one element of it. The other element is to have a reportability engine, an eligibility engine, so that you know which trade is coming in and what regime it's ready to be reported against. So having an engine that does that across multiple regimes is very efficient, for example. And the third element is the ability to manage exceptions, because in any given day, I'm sure all of our practitioners deal with exceptions that happen in their desks. You got to be very efficient about doing that. Otherwise, because it's T+1 reporting, it gets to be very complicated. So it's dictionaries, eligibility engine, and exception reporting.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Let's see, before we go to look at the poll results, do any of the other panelists think of any other functional challenges that we're missing?
The only thing just to add to that is the idea of proportionality. Because one of the things that we've seen, to build on Josh's point, is that, and Harry's actually, is it's one thing to say, here's what I've got to do. You've also got to see how you as an institution can get it done in a way that is cost efficient for you. Because chasing after the latest, brightest thing may not be the answer for every firm on the street. And figuring out where that balance lies for you and how you optimize that part of the whole thing also makes a difference.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so let's take a look at the poll results, if we may. So let's see, perhaps unsurprisingly, the leader, 44% suggesting that they are partly along the route towards implementing a holistic approach to regulatory reporting. A third say that they are mostly done with that, and 11% are saying they're completely done. So let's see, Malavika, what do you make of that? Do those results surprise you?
They don't surprise me. I'd be interested in, at some point, delving a little bit more into what the partly represents, because I suspect that is a wide-ranging spectrum, depending on the institution and the set of regulations one is talking about, and how global that applicability is. But looking at the volume of mostly, that fits what we've been seeing and hearing from a number of institutions in the street, in that now that as the regulations get more embedded into people's BAU structures, effectively most institutions we see are looking at reframing what they do and building these, and building common platforms with the institution. So the fact that it's mostly at about a third is actually, to me, it's quite positive, because taking the two together, that suggests that just under half are in a reasonable position. Yeah. So I'm sure the practitioners will, may have something to add to that, but I suspect there's going to be a very wide range in that partly, and that's where the devil's going to lay. And then that's where a number of RegTech solutions may have room to come in. Yeah,
Adam, Josh, what do you think?
I mean, I would say, I'd echo some of what Josh said earlier. I think if you look at the evolution of this, we now have very substantial functions, within the firms, looking at this and getting it done. And if you go back, some of the party may simply represent there are some obligations that are rather older, and they were put together at a time when, perhaps the firms weren't quite as organized. This was a little bit more in its infancy. I think if you look at some of the newer regulations, I would expect that, that may fall much more into the mostly category.
Yeah, that's a great point. This has been a moving feast over the last 10 years or so, right? And I think a lot of firms are burdened with legacy architecture and are moving regime by regime on their strategic platforms, or are able to build things in a new way that perhaps they couldn't have in the past. So I'd actually be interested in that 11% that were completely done, because that sounds pretty ideal. I wonder how they got there.
I was going to invite them on Zoom and see if they wanted to join us to kind of share how they did that. So maybe that's one for next time. Okay, so we're going to do another poll because we wanted to sort of figure out what people were most worried about in terms of the regulations that are top priority for their or vying for their attention right now. So again, go to Slido, please, right side of the video box on your screen, and vote. The options are, I'm not going to read through all of the various regs, that we've sort of bundled them as best we can. I'll take responsibility for any errors here. Essentially, the APAC derivatives reporting, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, the US derivatives reporting, CFTC and SEC, European transaction reporting, bunch of different initiatives there, the CAT in the US, or any other. So please go ahead and vote on that one, and we'll come back to that shortly. And let's move on with the Q&A while you vote. So I'm going to throw the next question to Adam, and it relates to the current state of play in the US and Europe with respect to CAT, SFTR, MiFID II, and EMIR refit. How do you see the current state of play with those regulations, and what lessons do you think have been learned in the rollout of those?
I mean, I guess the short answer is we've learned, and I've personally learned an enormous amount. I think if we go back to when we started doing, some of the swap dealer reporting in EMIR, and I think Harry touched on this a little bit, the way we think about handling exceptions, the way we think about handling eligibility, our thinking has evolved hugely on those. And I think if you look at the specific regulations, clearly MiFID is in its third birthday fairly soon. I can't quite believe where the last 3 years went. But is largely in a relatively stable, go forward state. EMIR, we look forward to the refit that comes in next year. And CAT and SFTR, look, they're still new, they're still bedding in. We've still go lives to happen on those. But if we turn to what have we learned, I think firstly I'd say is actually, I think we need, as an industry and also regulators, be continually looking back at what worked and what hasn't worked. And I think it's encouraging to see some of that. The EC ran a fitness check study, which published, I think, about a year ago. And in it, there's actually a number of interesting things that are worth calling out. I think reviewing where we've ended up with some overlaps in regulations, and some of that perhaps makes sense, some of that may not. Having more clarity on how data is used, I think, would also be very beneficial. As a firm, we can do a better job if we understand what purpose it's to be put to. And appreciate, there may be limits as to what can be divulged in some of the kind of conduct and supervisory functions. Having more standardized definitions and terminology, I think, and Harry, you mentioned, a dictionary, and we can talk about that, I think, a little bit more later in the panel. And then the other thing is where the regulations have encouraged standardization, that leads to better interoperability between vendors. It leads to greater opportunities for us as firms to collaborate with others on the street. And I think that's when, Malavika may want to expand on this. We've seen in MiFID the creation of a number of industry utilities, that's been hugely useful. And these were problems that we used to solve ourselves sort of within a firm, and actually you can't do that for some of these use cases. So I think really, where do I think going forward, is looking at really what do we need to do? And I feel like I'm looking in two directions, looking both kind of inwards at the data lineage and how do I get data from within the firm, and working out how can I go do a good job on that, and looking outward, what are the opportunities across the street for us to mutualize and pool effort and expertise. So, I think there's a huge amount to Well done.
Very good, thank you. Malavika.
So I think Adam set the scene very, very well. Before we talk about the industry utility piece, because I think there is a lot of mutualization that can be done, that has been done, but there's a lot more that can be done as regulations evolve, get more. Two things to add into the mix from a regulatory perspective. One is that in addition to the regulations we've been talking about, the lessons that we've learned collectively as an industry, and I suspect as a regulators from a regulatory perspective as well, will also come into play as some of the additional items that the FSB or the Financial Stability Board start to come into effect over the coming years. So by which, what do I mean, looking at that more specifically? So one of the things is the Financial Stability Board last year, well, a few years ago now, but certainly last year, put a timeline, started to put a clock, something called a unique product identifier. That will start to come into play globally. That's not a European or a US thing. That is going to be around the world. Effectively, if you're reporting to a trade repository, you're going to need to start to take this into effect. Now, admittedly, it's a couple of years out. But if one starts to look at what should firms be thinking about, and why does having this integrated internal approach matter, and why those dictionaries matter so much that Harry and Adam touched on, it basically having those strong foundations allows you to more easily start to look at these additional pieces. So that's the first piece. The second piece is actually the FTC recently, a few months ago, finalized a review of their data and record keeping rule set in the US. And again, that touches on a number of things that impacts both, not just practitioners, but also a number of market infrastructure providers in the street. So again, that's where you have the need for collaboration across the street, but also through some of these centralized utilities and at a range of differing points. So you've got those two pieces. But talking more specifically about the lessons learned, I think some of the clearinghouses did this first, and we've started to see this model emerge. Well, it's existed for a while in a number of spaces, but certainly in the data arena, the last few years has shown that the creation of new utilities, whether it's industry coming together through their own processes and their own shared problems, solve shared problems, or whether it's been a regulator saying that there needs to be a centralized provider for something, either of those two has fundamentally required for all of us as industry, as well as providers, to work together to solve these problems and to solve them once if we can. So for example, and again, we'll talk about this in more detail later on, but if we look at the lessons learned, one of the big things is, as regulators around the world want different classification codes or identifiers, one of the big things we're doing when we work with industry is to say, okay, how does that then manifest in terms of something practical? How does one build a hierarchy so that users can reuse and plug and play more easily and more efficiently? So I think you're getting this increased focus on efficiency as well. And that's particularly, I think, because the globalization impact of some of these rules as we look forward.
Very good, thank you. Harry, let's turn to you. How do you see things now, and with respect to those regulatory initiatives, and what lessons have we learned?
So I think the latest regulation that is coming around is SFTR, which has got a definition of 5 different counterparties. I could bore you for the next 15 minutes as to what they are, but I won't. And SFTR also requires 150 attributes of reporting with a very strict time frame of T+1. And I think the lesson that we have learned by working with our client community is to make sure that we can, trade data emanates from multiple places, and make sure that we can enrich that data with a derivative service bureau appropriate reference data from DSB, the LEIs that come from Glyph, and all of the industry standard identifiers that allow us to then have an enriched data set mapped to a dictionary. If you have that enriched data set that comes from industry reference elements, as Malavika was talking about, then it allows you to have a clean data set that allows you to say, okay, now I'm going to run it through a trade and transaction reporting regime. And it just reduces the number of elements, errors that you have downstream. That's the big lesson that we've taken away from here.
Very good. We'll be coming back to data standardization and the like in a bit. So let's see. Let's take a look at those poll results now, I think. Okay, so pretty clear view here. It's the European transaction reporting. SFTR, as you mentioned, Harry's bundled in on that. 59% of us looking at that. And then US, a little less so. Not too much focus from this audience on Asia, and a bit on the cat. So surprising, Adam?
Well, firstly, I'd say, the answer I have to give is it's like asking me to choose between my children. All of the regulations are our favourites, and they're all equally important. Clearly, I mean, look, no, probably doesn't really surprise me in the sense I think that may represent, over the last few years, a lot of the action has been in Europe. MiFID and SFTR. I think. And certainly speaking from our perspective, the security-based swaps, I think, be interesting to run this poll again in say September next year. I think we'll see that number go up as we start to grapple with, a large portion of the US flow now coming into scope. And also as we get towards CFTC rewrite, which may happen at the same time or slightly after. And the Asian regimes, 0% I guess is probably a little bit of a surprise. But clearly they're certainly for us, they're big and important flows, and there's a lot of specific nuance in Asia, yes, that we need to grapple with in terms of market practice.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so let's get back to Q&A. We did the poll, the earlier poll question about a holistic integrated approach to gauge the audience's view. Let's get the panelists' view. Starting with you, Josh. To what extent are firms truly seeking to implement a holistic / integrated approach to meeting their regulatory reporting obligations? Is this the holy grail?
In a way. I mean, let me just start by saying that I don't think firms want to be 100% holistic, 100% integrated. There are certainly differences between these regulatory regimes. They rhyme, but they're not the same, right? So, for example, some are activity-based and some are position-based. Some deal with valuation. Some have data submission requirements of 15 minutes, and others are T+1, right? So there are certainly differences. But that being said, there are a lot of similarities. And I think that's where a holistic approach can certainly help. So starting at, what's your golden source? And how many regimes can those play into? What's your ingestion approach, right? How do you take the data from upstream and convert it into a format and use more universally? How do you transform that information into a data model that makes sense, or data models that make sense? How do you submit that data? How do you pack up and send it out? And then finally, how do you get the exceptions back, and how do you handle those things? And then on top of that, I would imagine there'd be a common of policies or procedures or standards in terms of timeliness, in terms of managing open issues, in terms of managing incidents, sort of all those, sort of day-to-day operational things that really make this stuff tick that can be applied across the board. The challenge is really, how to take these very different inputs, in a way to handle them, to create a very different set of outputs, regulators. And then once you get your exceptions back, how do you find a holistic way to manage those things as well?
Very good. So let's bring you into the conversation, John. Joshua sort of indicated a number of things you've got to think about there. How do you see that? And maybe sort of to expand things out a bit, given your world, how can cloud help in meeting those requirements?
Yeah, well, I think the practitioners, obviously, and my colleagues on the on the session, know much more about the what they actually have to do. So the AWS looks at we're as an enabler to build the infrastructure, and as an enabler to add services to be able to provide the infrastructure for all those various elements. So we see a lot of movement as folks look to create a holistic approach. I mean, one, to Josh's point at the very beginning, is there's a lot of antiquated systems. There's a lot of different systems that people are trying to harmonize, and the cost to rebuild all that on premise, or the cost to re-architect the individual systems, sometimes become prohibitive to create a holistic approach. So a lot of the movement we see for firms around regulatory reporting is the ability to move to the cloud to be able to create new mechanisms for ingestion or new speed to market, new ability to transfer data to a regulator who's now accepting information across a cloud infrastructure, but also be able to deal with the swings back and forth of market volatility. So having to have infrastructure in place that handles the most amount of transactions you'll ever see during different trading volatility, events that we've seen throughout COVID, requires a lot of money that you had to purchase and put that equipment in place. The ability to build on the cloud and then have that scale up and down as you need to be able to utilize it, is incredibly important to be able to have that infrastructure. And the other is to be able to, to build the mechanisms, whether, and I'm oversimplifying it, but, the ability to have a data lake that all of your sources are ingested into, that has the efficacy behind all of the lineage of where it came from, who can control it, how that data could be altered or not, so that you can prove to a regulator that actually is the original source data, but then be able to feed that into the various reporting mechanisms for all the different events, allows both the company to see a unified view of that information, as well as then report out in the various mechanisms. And to Josh's point, address it in different time requirements. Some things are post-trade settlements, which are going to happen after the end of the day. Others are events that are occurring during the day. So a lot of our focus with all of our financial services customers is really to listen to them and help enable them, and then help enable our partners like Harry's firm with AxiomXL to build the mechanisms for them to be able to offer services that might not have been able to be done at scale and at speed and cost effectively, to be able to address kind of an ever-changing cornucopia of requirements, because that's never going to stop. But to allow the experts to be able to come to the platform to build, and then if we need to make changes or we need to address new solutions and add new mechanisms, then we can continue to evolve the infrastructure to give people the components to be able to utilize it, at a much faster pace, and to innovate and experiment. So one of the things that the cloud enables, and not as a sales pitch, is the ability to experiment with a way of doing something different without making a massive investment into that. So whether it's building a new application or looking at new infrastructure to be able to do that, it allows you to spin that up, sample it, experiment, make a change to it without a long-term investment to see if that actually resolved the issue.
Very good, thank you. Quick pause to remind the audience that we are taking questions on Slido. I noticed that we do have some lined up. We'll probably get to these at the end of this session in 10 minutes or so. So yeah, please do post your questions on Slido, and we will get to those questions at the end. Okay, so let's resume. Some of the points John was making there, I think, segue quite nicely into the data management question, and with that, how emerging standards can help. We've mentioned both a little earlier, so let me throw that to Malavika first. What are the data management challenges when taking an integrated approach, and how are emerging standards helping?
So two things really come to mind. One is, it's not enough to have the standards. Having that as a very important foundational layer. The next piece, and Adam and Josh both talked about this, is then understanding how you want to integrate those standards into your institution. So what do I mean by that? So the first piece is, if we look at having the standards and what's the benefit of those, ideally, a good standard gets you to a point where you shouldn't have to interpret what the data values mean. To the earlier points about data dictionaries and those pieces, each data element needs to be clearly listed, identified, defined, and that takes the guesswork out of it, so that everyone in the firm that looks at that data point knows exactly how it should be used or what it's trying to define or determine. Because, and that becomes important not just for your regulatory reporting, but let's assume that value goes to the regulators, but eventually maybe some of those values may also be picked up in your internal models and other work you're doing. If those data elements are not being utilized consistently, both inside and from a reporting perspective outside your organization, there's a real danger that people assume that those values mean something very different depending upon what role they hold. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, when you look at standards, it's also important to look at how the standards interoperate, to the extent that different data elements are reportable in different jurisdictions. So for example, if you have a 3 or a 4-tiered fundamental classification identification structure, looking at that piece of it, well, what does that mean in terms of how you're going to consolidate your data? What does that mean for what your workflows are internally? and how you then want to connect to any external institutions, let alone to regulators. Looking also at communication layers, having standards, and Adam mentioned this earlier, having standards, if it's done right, can have enormous benefits in terms of how you communicate with each other. Whether that's standards for something that's, purely off of the blockchain type world, or whether it's standards for things that are around a kind of an older based approach, because blockchain is fantastic for some institutions. It's not good. It's not necessarily the ideal solution for everybody, depending upon where you are in the chain and what your institutional strategic view is. So that's the first piece. And the second piece about how you then integrate those standards into your organization. What we've seen when we've spoken to many of the users that we deal with, is that there is no right answer in that. Some have centralized the way in which they operate, others have it fragmented, but and have it almost by desk. And that's dependent very much by this, from what we can see, by two things: the cost of implementation, but being very practical, but also that their preferred strategic models. So some have multiple desks with different functions kind of grouped together. Others have a centralized engine that drives everything when it comes to reg tech pieces. So in essence, basically, it's about having standards that can interoperate where they need to, but also being integrated within the firm's infrastructure in a cost-efficient and practical manner.
Malavika, do you think the regulators should be more prescriptive when it comes to data standards?
So from what we can see, that seems to be a trend that's happening more and more. In any case, you initially saw that in terms of things like the UTI and pieces like that, so unique transaction identifier, when that first came out around the Dodd-Frank time and those pieces. And increasingly, you're starting to see the idea of a UPI coming through, and that's the idea for that is for regulators around the world, effectively, to be able to have a common language in terms of when they look at that level of transaction reporting. And then perhaps there are other identifiers like the ISIN, the OTC ISIN, or other pieces that, again, are purpose specific. So I think you are starting to see regulators more and more focus on specific, they're naming what the identifiers are, but they're also starting to ask that the International Standards Organization be involved in the way those standards are developed and maintained over time. And what you're seeing as a result is places like ISO or the International Standards Organization are starting to create maintenance agencies for some of the codes that change more frequently, to allow the market to have a direct input and to allow those elements to keep pace with what the market needs, but in a way that the industry as a whole and regulators are also able to absorb.
Very good. Okay, let's go back to the original question around data management challenges and throw it over to Adam. What are they? Do standards help, Adam?
I mean, absolutely. Building on what Malavika said, there's a lot of interest from regulators. We've been working with a number of others on the street, and the FCA and the Bank of England have both published digital regulatory reporting strategies. I mean, maybe I can just give an example. So we've been collaborating also with ISDA on their common domain model, which covers OTC derivatives. So one of the key pieces of work is, you kind of need two things. You need an external model that you can use, a common language, you can talk to other people, because then at that point you can start to express regulation in, potentially machine readable ways. But having an external model is only any good if you can actually map it to your internal model. And so one of the pieces of work we've been thinking a lot about is, how do we make that part of our business as usual process? So right now, a lot of that is, that comes to people in my team, or, we map to an external model only at the point where we need to report it. What if you turn the thing on its head, and at the point where you're putting a new product together, the person in the front office, the quant, the developer doing that actually, is also part of the process of mapping, for example, in this case, derivative payoffs to that external common domain model. Then suddenly, once you can make that part of your process, actually quite a lot of the work that my team needs to do in terms of going and sourcing data and matching that up to some external requirement. It also allows you to mutualize across the street some of the interpretation and work to understand this, and again express what's required by the regulators with respect to that model. So there's a huge amount of work we've been doing there. We've also recently been partnering with Finos, and we've open sourced our model-to-model mapping tool, which used to be called Ally, is now called Legend. And that's something we hope that can be useful amongst different institutions on the street to curate and update those external models. It's also something that we can use to do that mapping of internal data to external data. And I guess I'll leave you the challenge is, that's great when you happen to have OTC derivatives, for example, and there exists a body that can curate that external model. I think, and it goes back to the question you asked Malavika, should regulators be more prescriptive? How do we replicate that across all sorts of other asset classes, flows that are incredibly diverse? And that is a very difficult, but essential challenge to solve.
Very good. Throw the question over to Harry.
So I think building on what Adam was talking about, we look at there are three elements that we look at. One of them is, as we build dictionaries with the client, we start with a dictionary that we bring to the table, and we look at three elements of those: asset classes on one angle, periodic data on one angle, and the reference data on one angle. So if you're able to separate those out and say, okay, which are the periodic elements, which are the reference data elements, and what data is required by asset class, that's a really good way to think about dictionaries. The other thing that we learned as we did client implementations was, as Josh talked about, was data lineage. Because data emanates from multiple trading systems, you really need to have a mechanism by which you could automatically track where the data arrived and which trade repository it landed onto. And if you have that lineage automatically tracked, that makes it the job much easier, because this is a big burden for many organizations. And the end of the day, the last element is having a point-in-time data set. So at the end of every T+1 reporting cycle, you end up with a T+1 reporting data set that says, this is what my positions were. And that's really good for audit purposes. And if they come back to you 2 years from now and say, on June 22nd, what did you do? You can completely replicate that. So dictionaries in those three areas, data lineage, having it automated, and having a point-in-time data set. I think those are the three key challenges, and there are ways to get those done.
Very good, thank you. And final word on data management challenges goes to John.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach, because I think my colleagues have laid out a lot of the practitioner challenges. So one of the challenges that the cloud brings is that in many instances, firms, if they outsource something to the cloud, whether to a partner or to the cloud themselves, they're now having to deal with outsourcing requirements that didn't apply to the workload running inside of their own environment. So one of the things that our team works with a lot of our financial services customers on is the ability to understand, as you look to move a workload to the cloud, which is now not going to be located inside your environment, you now need to identify the legal entities, the regulatory regimes, the data that has to be reported on up front as part of the software development lifecycle. So as you look at a migration lifecycle to move to the cloud, regulatory reporting and regulatory awareness isn't a bolt-on at the end. It has to be part of the cloud governance model that starts up front to understand that, because the cloud creates its own set of regulatory requirements from the EBA already, and then ESMA and EIOPA as they come into play. So as the infrastructure of the provision of your service changes, you have to deal with that explanation to the regulators as well. So they want to understand that what in your control environment changed, who has access to the data differently, how is it actually stored, how is it encrypted, how is it shared across the firm, especially if the firm is outsourcing, through to itself, across different entities across the environment. So a lot of the focus in the cloud from our standpoint is being able to make sure that as our customers move those workloads, that we're working with them up front to identify who they're going to have to report to, not just on the fact that the workload is there to report the data itself and what it's doing, but the fact that this is now a different solution, a way the solution is provisioned, and how you go through the regulatory reporting, and in many cases approval for that workload itself to have to go to the cloud, and making sure you're addressing those as part of a parallel set of actions across the development lifecycle. So understanding what the data, specific to data, what controls you have around the data that are hopefully better or are more transparent and are more auditable and are more automated, that you can actually assure the audit and security side. I call it, I spend a lot of time with what I call the Department of Nervousness at financial institutions, who are trying to make sure they can represent the efficacy of all of the information. So harmonizing your control environment across the cloud allows you to represent to any regulator that you're actually running everything the same way from an infrastructure, cybersecurity, access management standpoint, and allows you to focus much more on the delivery of value from the workload. But that's part of the migration model that has to be addressed is how is that outsourcing actually changing, and what you have to do to make sure you're going through that process to educate the regulators around your movement to the cloud.
Very good, thank you. Okay, we're running out of time, so this one will be our final question before we go to Slido for a number of questions from the audience. We'll see how many we can get through. So let me throw this question to Harry. Once practitioners have established an integrated reporting mechanism, assuming they have, how do they monitor performance? What's the approach for that? You're on mute, Harry.
Sorry, it's about having a reconciliation mechanism or an engine that delivers the unpaired and unmatched trades, either from trade repositories and anybody you're reporting to, having that available to you in a very clean way, and so that you can resolve those elements in a timely manner. That, I think, is the easiest way to monitor your performance. And I think another element of that is, if you are doing securities lending, this kind of data set at the end of that process does tell you on a day-to-day basis, who are your really biggest counterparties? Who are you really exposed to? And that kind of plays back to the risk community in the organization that says, okay, I now understand that on a day-to-day basis, I may have something called Herstat risk, which is another very esoteric concept, but at least I know who I'm exposed to.
Very good. Josh.
I have two answers to this question. So the first is that if firms are monitoring performance, I would ask them to look for completeness, accuracy, and timeliness, right? Has everything, in the stack of applications within your firm, has everything from system A gotten to system B, B to C, et cetera, and then out the door to the trade repository. And are you able to do that reconciliation, deal with MACs, deal with exits, those sorts of things. Accuracy is the data itself in each specific field accurate. And you can probably think of a lot of ways to test that through the flow of the regulatory report data. And then timeliness speaks for itself. Are you getting your information out on time, and are all the upstream systems hitting their SLAs to enable you to do that, right? So that's sort of a basic daily series of things that I would urge firms to do. The second answer that I have to this is that firms just shouldn't be monitoring performance, but they should be improving performance, right? We've seen a lot of regulatory interest space. We've seen fines in the tens of millions of dollars. And it's pretty clear that there's across the board are not just expecting us to tread water, but they're asking us to actively improve on our performance year over year. Right, and so that gets into questions of what's good and how do we get there, and how do we essentially do more over time with less. So it's a big question here, but I would urge firms to set that are fairly audacious and a step up from where they are now, and be able to demonstrate to regulators that there's a plan to achieve these goals, over the next year or years, and are doing so in a very controlled manner.
Very good. Okay, let's turn over to some questions from Slido, that is from our audience. There's a few here touching on some questions I think we've addressed, so let's prioritize the ones that we haven't. Audience question: we still hear a lot about BCBS 239. Why is that, and what solutions can solve outstanding compliance problems? Any thoughts on that, panelists?
Okay, I can start. I think BCBS 239 has got 14 different, sometimes I would say conflicting requirements. So that's an element of it. And I'd encourage you to, the way I think about this is, we've created a concept called service level expectations for data, much like how you would think of service level agreements for delivering a service. But if we take the idea of service level expectations for data, and we have 9 elements that take all of the 14 BCBS 239 principles into it, that we put all of that into our dictionaries, and I think that's the easiest way to solve that. And I think our panelists would also agree that having dictionaries and having good ideas on what your data really is, Malavika talked about that as well, having each and every element represented cleanly, that's the way to do it, really.
Very good. If there aren't any other remarks on BCBS 239, it has come up a couple of times over the last few days. Another regulation that has come up a couple of times, and another question about it here. Panel has talked about data-driven regulations, but how can firms implement conduct regulations such as IFR and IFD? This is the new investment firms regulation directive. Any thoughts on that, folks?
So IFR is about market risk, credit risk, and large exposure risk. And the foundation for, so there's a new thing called K factors. There's a series of elements that need to be implemented for reporting against those. So I think that's what we know about. I would leave it to the other panelists to opine on these elements as well.
No, okay. I think slightly outside of our remit, to be honest, on this particular panel, but it has come up a number of times. All right, so let's. I think we're out of time, so let's wrap up this session. Let me thank our fantastic panelists, Harry, Adam, Malavika, Josh, and John. Thank you all for your time and for your generosity in sharing your expertise. It's been a great session. It's much appreciated. We'll see you at the next one. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
See you later. Okay, so now we'll move on to our next session. And I'm about to welcome Matthew Vincent of Univista, who will be joining me for a fireside chat, as we call them, to talk about best approaches to data quality for underpinning regulatory reporting. So welcome to Matthew.
Hi.
Hello, Matthew. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
We don't have you on camera. Oh, yes, we do now. There we go. Good. Excellent. Thanks for joining us. How are you? Okay, good.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Fabulous. Okay, so we've just been talking about the complex set of global regs that people are facing with respect to reporting, but it's, data quality and consistency a major challenge for a lot of financial institutions. From my sort of pedestrian view, I look at it looks to me like a clear-cut case of garbage in, garbage out. So what we're hoping to hear from Matthew is how to deal with some of the more painful aspects of this, and to address the issue of data quality and regulatory reporting. So before we start, Matthew, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your stance on this area of the marketplace?
Hi, well, actually, I was just thinking about this earlier because somebody asked me a question, but I started life as a microbiologist. And I think perhaps if I'd start with that, we might be having a slightly different interview in today's current climate. But anyway, I've been doing reg reporting now since 2007. Started off with doing MiFID I at Citigroup. I've tried in various ways to escape reg reporting and not succeeded. So I now find myself head of regulatory reporting at Univista, part of the London Stock Exchange Group. And there I'm responsible for working with our clients, working with our regulators, and more specifically building out the Univista data analytics tool.
Very good. Okay. Well, listen, thank you for joining us. Thanks for sharing today.
No problem.
Before we start, just to remind the audience that we do encourage questions. We take questions through the Slido platform, which is on the right of the video that you're watching now. So if you put in any questions you may have, for Matthew. We'll come to those at the end of this session. So let me kick things off then. With respect to data quality, Matthew, what is the sort of current state of affairs when it comes to data quality for regulatory reporting?
Well, I mean, I think obviously MiFID II was a huge increase in complexity from the requirements under MiFID I. So there's a scope increase in terms of the products reported, the fields reported, and I guess more importantly, in some ways, the number of firms impacted by the regulation. So we saw a lot of the buy-side firms brought in who previously didn't have to make transaction reports under MiFID and the original MiFID. So we've now been live for almost 3 years in January. So we went live 2018, now up to 2021. I think it's fair to say that we've definitely seen an improvement in the reporting quality. However, we are still seeing, and I still see in my daily round, and certainly that we see in more generally in terms of the ARM platform, high volume of errors and high volume remediation activity as we see firms correcting and reporting that they've made previously incorrectly. So I think there's quite a lot of work to do.
Right, so work in progress, still room for improvement, as they might say at school.
Absolutely.
Are there reports or types of reports that practitioners are finding particularly difficult?
I think it's more a case, not necessarily of types or of business models, but it's just the population of data, the data requirements in those transaction reports. So I'll just talk to a few of the sort of the high volume issues that we can see using the analytics that we've been developing. The number one, I think regulators have talked about this, and FCA have drawn it to our attention recently in Market Watch 65. TV tick has been not a successful implementation, should we say. I think it's been a struggle for firms, it's been a struggle for venues, and we see probably something like 60+% of all transaction reports with a TV tick are being made incorrectly. And that is leading to massive back reporting obligations for firms as they go back and have to correct very high volumes of reports with the incorrect TV tick. Trade time has always been a bugbear. It's been a bugbear since 2007 and remains and continues to be a difficult field to get right. Although it's supposed to be standardized now in UTC, you still have to make the clock change adjustments. You still have to map it correctly to the source. And again, firms are still struggling with that. Use of the INTC account. The use of the INTC account is supposed to be balanced. So what you put into it, according to your transaction reports, is supposed to be the same as what you take out of it end of day. And we see a lot of firms just simply not populating it correctly and that account not being flat. Complex trade ID. Complex trade is supposed to join two reports together that are related to one another. We see lots of reports that are stranded, so there's only one report with the complex trade ID on it. Commodity derivative indicator, very, very high volumes of mispopulation. Incorrect counterparties being reported. The AMF discussed this the other day on a public presentation. They have grave concerns over the quality of the counterparties that firms are putting on their reports. Short selling indicators, also bad, very hard one to get right, but also, in some cases should be quite straightforward to get correct. And we're just basically seeing high volume errors across all of the fields that FCA have made public comment on over the last 3 years that firms aren't getting correct.
And what do you put that down to? Is that a resource issue within the firms, do you think?
I think it's many things. It's interpretation issues, as in did they interpret the rules and map it to their business models correct in the first place? It's implementation issues, it's complex IT stacks above the reporting engines, all manner of things. All those things combine into generating an incorrect report. It's very easy to get it wrong, very easy.
Okay, so what are the consequences of getting it wrong, and what would be the benefits of getting it right, assuming we can do that?
I think I mean, at the moment, I think we believe FCA and certainly other regulators are writing to and contacting firms where they see issues, and they ask firms to explain those issues. And FCA are asking firms to fill out the errors and omissions forms and asking firms to remediate those issues, which in itself, whether you identify the issue yourself or whether you identify the FCA or a regulator identifies that issue for you, remediation is costly. Back reporting is an exercise that is costly, and getting the code fixed and tested is expensive. Up to now, we haven't seen a regulator take a sanction. Some regulators have talked publicly about imminent sanction, but nothing publicly, aware, no records. Obviously, in the past, we've seen firms find high numbers for misreporting under MiFID, but so far nothing for MiFID 2. The benefits of getting it right, that's an interesting one. I think the benefit, apart from the obvious, it doesn't cost you a fortune to fix it. There are other, side effects of getting reg reporting correct. Certainly in the past, we've seen where firms have identified the wrong counterparties. Now, chances are, if the counterparty is wrong on the transaction report, it may be wrong further up the stack as well. So you may have incorrect credit risk, you may have incorrect all sorts of things that could be linked to getting that record and identifying your counterparty correctly. So it's worth doing a good clean data set for reg reporting for many reasons, apart from just making sure the regulator doesn't sanction you for getting it wrong.
Is there a sort of reputational risk element to this? I mean, if you're, are people worried about being seen to be not particularly good at this?
I think nobody wants to see their name on the front page of the FT. Obviously, there are a long list of firms that have been sanctioned in the past, and I don't think any of them can say, I was pleased to be, it's certainly the Market Watch. Everyone knows their name. No one's going to be proud of it. So yes, there is absolutely a reputational risk associated with it, definitely.
Okay, so lots to do. How have firms addressed some of these data quality issues that you're talking about?
Well, I think we've definitely seen that firms have built good quality control frameworks. They've built out the infrastructure. They've probably put the reconciliations in place. And what they should be doing is maintaining a strong quality testing program throughout, detecting issues, tracking issues, monitoring those issues to resolution, and excuse me, fixing the issues where they find them, and then remediating those issues. But they've got to keep an eye on what's going out of the door, because even if it's right one day, it could very easily be wrong the next. If somebody introduces a change incorrectly, the change program isn't managed particularly well, or even just an outside provider changes the data that they're sending in a certain field and it goes unnoticed, and therefore the reporting goes incorrectly. So just ongoing assessment of quality is absolutely vital.
Very good. And what has been the regulator's response to these data quality issues? We spoke on the last panel quite a bit about data standards. There has been some mandating of data standards, which I think could help. What have you seen?
Well, I mean, the obvious one is the market watches. So FCA have made public release market watches. There's been a flurry this year. I can't remember all the numbers. The last one was Market Watch 65. I think that came out early September. And they are drawing attention to errors that they see. And quite a number of those errors are fairly, they're blind in the obvious. You can see, it's easy for FCA to see that in the data sets. Where they attend seminars, conferences, workshops, we've held our own, and regulators have been invited to talk about data quality. We've certainly had FCA, and we've certainly also heard the Dutch regulator is also more prominent in the UK these days, due to Brexit, but he's also made commentary on data quality issues that they see. And also, they are contacting firms. They are writing to firms and asking firms to explain data quality issues that they see. And it's always unpleasant to receive a letter from the FCA challenging you on your data quality issues.
Absolutely. Right, so last question before we go to Slido, because we've got a bunch of questions from the audience from
Sure.
You've sort of touched on this, but sort of in summary, if you like, what should firms be doing to resolve their data quality issues in regulatory reporting? And quick one from you, how can you help at Univista?
Sure. So they've got to fulfill their obligations under Article 15 RTS 22, and basically that means take measures to address data quality. So we at Univista released what we call reporting performance module back in May this year, which was released to all firms, and it's basically an enhanced MIS suite, allows a bit of peer-to-peer comparison of mistakes and errors that are being made. But since February, we've been running a beta program on our data analytics package, and that is basically designed to do three things. One, it gives you much better MI, so you can demonstrate control over your daily reporting process. Secondly, it contains a suite of control dashboards, so you can look at your reported data profile, map that back to your business model, and just validate that what the regulator is seeing is correct as far as your business model is concerned. And the third aspect of it is data accuracy alerts. So we're alerting firms on data accuracy where we can specifically say that field is inaccurate, it is wrong. Other alerts where we can say, look, chances are that's wrong. You probably want to look at your model, you want to look at your interpretation and see whether you've got it correct or not. And then thirdly, we generate sample data and samples of data that is reported with outlying values. So unusual prices, unusual trade sizes, for example, which we recommend that firms tick that back to the front office records just to make sure that those values are absolutely correct. And that all goes live now. It's going live and being rolled out to customers as we speak.
Very good. Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions from the audience for you.
Sure.
First one of these. This is quite apt given that my kids got sent home from school because of COVID-19 at the weekend. So is doing reconciliations like rechecking your homework, do we have to do them?
I'm pretty certain that Article 15 in RTS 22 says, yes, you absolutely must do them. It is a legal obligation. I don't think they don't prescribe it in absolute detail, as in step-by-step approach to reconciliation. But to cut a long story short, yes, you should reconcile the record that's held by the regulator to the record that's held by the arm to the record that's held in your reporting engine to the actual transaction that was booked in the front office. So yes, it's a legal obligation.
Very good, very clear answer, thank you. In your experience, are legacy systems particularly problematic when it comes to accurate reporting? If this is the case, how can RegTech help? This being a RegTech conference, of course.
I think all systems are a problem because they're all managed by human beings. And they're all subject to error. I think there are some, we're deploying RegTech to improve data quality, to pick up things that we wouldn't have done before and simplify the data quality checking process by doing it on the platform in a RegTech cloud environment, which we would never, we didn't do before. It's all new. So I don't think it can be blamed on legacy systems. RegTech has certainly got a place to pay in, has certainly got a role in making this better. But I think in some firms, you've got probably 200 plus systems in some of the more complex broker dealers on top of the regulatory reporting. It's just too easy to get wrong,
Another question, what are the pros and cons of using a third party to drive data quality for regulatory reporting?
So can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what are the pros and cons of using a third party to drive data quality for regulatory reporting?
I think the pros are and I'll talk to me as a third party because I guess we are a third party in this case. The pros are we are seeing and can see data. So we are tuning the tool to reflect the quality issues that we see across the reporting community. So that's one of the pros. And the second pro is, it's all in the same place. It's in the same architecture. You've sent us the data already. It's the data that leaves us to go to the regulator. So there's no need to export the data, run the data into a different system for checking. It's all in one place. The cons are we can't tell you everything that's wrong. We can tell you that your top 10 counterparty in the UK on the LSE for off exchange was HSBC, but we can't tell you that you should have reported NatWest Markets. So we can't tell you everything, but what we can do is collate and curate that data in one place, in a dashboard, so that it makes it easy for you to actually tick those records back to what they should be and make sure that data is correct. So we try, but we can't do everything.
Okay, final question, and you have touched on this, but why not reiterate it? How does Univista identify data quality issues that are flagged in the application? How do you do that?
No, sure. So several sources. So the first thing we've done is Market Watch, because it's the application in the very least should be able to detect or at least point you in the direction of issues that the FCA can see. So Market Watch is the first source. The second source is high volume remediation issues that we see from clients. So where possible, if it's possible to detect that logically, then we'll also design the application to allow us to do that. We also look back to final notices that they've issued in the past for primarily MiFID I, but the issues are the same: incorrect counterparties, incorrect entities, incorrect population. So we're linking back to that as well. So we're taking all those sources, and also we've got our own intellectual capital, so we can work out illogical data combinations and extending the accuracy testing beyond the ARM validation. The ARM is already testing the data 400 times in 400 different ways, plus for each regulatory report according to ESMA validation rules. But we can extend that and look at data quality and data quality patterns and work out better ways of detecting accuracy issues as well.
Very good. Thank you. We are actually out of time. Matt, appreciate your time today and for sharing your experience with us. Been a great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good one. Bye-bye. Let's move on to the next session. And for that one, we have a joint presentation from ESMA and Glyph, talking about the new European single electronic format, enabling trusted machine-readable financial reporting. Sounds very apt given the day's session. So let me welcome Anna Scortino, Policy Officer at ESMA, and Claire Rowley, Head of Business Operations at Glyph. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me hand over to you guys, and I'll enjoy watching. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. So it's for me to start. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on your time zone, everyone. My name is Anna Scortino. I'm Policy Officer at ESMA, European Securities and Markets Authority, and I'm here to introduce to you the European Single Electronic Format. Next slide, please. So I have been a project manager at ESMA for the European Single Electronic Format since already 3 years, since 2017. And I'm here to explain to you what is the new European Single Electronic Format. So ESEF, which is the acronym we use for this, is the new format for companies' financial reporting. In a nutshell, it means that all annual financial reports of issuers, so entities which are admitted to trading on EU or EEA regulated markets, will need to be prepared in XHTML format. XHTML means that it's just basically a web page that can be consumable in any web browser without any further technology needed. Obviously, the design of this page can be very bare, can be without images, without design, without style, but it can also just look and feel like a PDF, as in the example I will present to you in a second. What introduces machine readability to issuers' annual financial report is the fact that whenever those annual financial reports contain IFRS consolidated financial statements, those will be required to be marked up using XBRL tags. XBRL is a standard which requires the use of a taxonomy, which is basically a vocabulary of defined terms. The taxonomy to be used for ESEF is the IFRS taxonomy prepared by the International Accounting Standards Board, which is also in charge of developing the IFRS accounting standards. As you may have come across XBRL because it has been required already by the SEC in the American market for quite a few years. The novelty introduced by ESEF, which in the meantime has also been is being introduced also by the SEC, is inline XBRL, meaning that the one document, one human readable document, will also embed XBRL tags via the inline XBRL technology. So basically you will have one single document which looks and feels potentially like a PDF, which behind it has embedded tags which can be extrapolated from the human readable document and used for, of course, analysis, benchmarking, all sorts of analysis whereby the data can be extrapolated from its context and used in any type of models. Contrarily to other regulatory reporting using XBRL in Europe, that for ESEF is an open taxonomy model, meaning that whenever there is no tag that reflects the intended accounting meaning of the disclosure being marked up, then preparers are allowed to create extensions. The only additional requirement is that an extension needs to be anchored to the closest taxonomy element. What were we trying to do here? Obviously, financial reporting is not like prudential reporting. It is for the purpose. It covers a much broader type of entities. It covers a much broader type of needs of users. Therefore, it was basically impossible for us to define set fields to be filled in by companies. Therefore, we provided a core taxonomy, which is a list of potential items, but we also told issuers, we also told preparers that they could adapt the taxonomy to their own needs and create extensions for that. Obviously, this reduces machine readability because extensions are not machine readables, and that is why we introduced the additional requirement to anchor those extensions to the closest taxonomy element, which means that even extensions will be related back to the core taxonomy, and therefore some degree of machine readability will be enabled. When is the ESEF coming into force? Detail tagging will be required for the primary financial statements from 2020. So the first annual financial reports in ESEF format, including detail tags, will be submitted in the first 4 months by the end of April 2021, with an additional requirement to block tag notes, text of the notes starting in 2022. There's also striking the balance between the needs of the users who clearly claim a need for as much as possible detail tags, but also the needs of preparers who want to limit the effort clearly to do this. There are also discussions about a potential, there are some discussions in some jurisdictions that the date of entry into force of ESEF may be postponed by 1 year due to the COVID crisis, but there is no certainty on this at the moment. And at any rate, we're already seeing some preparers doing this, at least on a voluntary basis. Next slide, please. So this is just to provide you with an example of what an XHTML file looks like. This is taken from the example ESMA has prepared, the Global LEI Foundation has prepared in cooperation with ESMA of an ESEF compliant annual financial report in ESEF format. That is indeed the annual report for 2019. As you can see in the slide, it is just a web page that looks and feels just like a PDF. But if we go to the next slide, please. If you're scrolling down in that same annual financial report, you will see that using what we call a viewer, it is possible to identify behind that layer of human readable information, also the machine readable information. This is displayed on the right side of the screen under fact properties. When one clicks on a relevant number corresponding to a line item of the primary financial statement, a set of metadata appears that can be carried, as I mentioned earlier, can be extrapolated from that from this human readable context and used in databases for all sorts of analysis and comparison with peers, with peer companies and why not non-peer companies too. And this is really the value added of ESEF at this stage, is that it allows machine readability of financial data, which until now has been locked into non-machine readable PDFs. And just to conclude on the next slide, please, I've included some resources for those of you who may want to find out more. First of all, the ESMA website, the ESEF webpage, contains a wealth of information, including a link to the example I presented in the previous two slides of the annual financial report of GLIFE for 2019, prepared in ESEF format. There are also 3 video tutorials on YouTube presenting the further features of ESEF that may be of interest. And last but not least, the final report on the draft RTS on ESEF, which is the preparatory work that ESMA undertook and then submitted to the European Commission to develop delegated acts that mean that the ESEF has finally become a law in the European Union. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you, Anna. And it's a pleasure to be with you all here today. My name is Claire Rowley. I manage the business operations at the Global LAI Foundation. Moving to the next page, I will highlight the use of the LEI within that 2019 report that Anna just demonstrated and also mentioned was highlighted by ESMA as a usage or an implementation of the SF reporting requirements. As Anna mentioned, the introduction of SF, it unlocks value that previously has been buried in PDF or non-machine readable documents. So we see SF as a really important step forward to make information for investors more easily accessible. And we believe that the LEI being embedded within that reporting format is an important building block. For a quick mention of what is this legal entity identifier, or the LEI, for those that may not be aware, it is a global open standard for identification. The system itself was put in place by the Financial Stability Board and leaders of the G20 after the previous financial crisis. We operate in an environment with heavy interaction with the regulatory community. So we as a foundation, we are responsible for operational and technical standards. We are overseen by a group called the Regulatory Oversight Committee, which consists of 71 regulatory authorities from around the world. And we work with 37 organizations that issue LEIs, meaning they have the direct connection to the legal entity. They are also the experts locally on legal entity identification. So by linking to the LEI, this unlocks a wealth of benefits for investors. The first and foremost is transparency. So with the LEI, any investor can easily identify the filing firm. This can be done manually for individual investors by clicking the link to the global open profile of the company within the global LEI repository. Or for institutional investors, they can set up an automated program for connecting to the GLIFE API and pulling in easily all of that additional reference data about the company. This is especially important as the basic reference data associated with a company can change over time. So for example, the address, the operating status of the company, that can change. Well, of course, the filing itself is stagnant. It remains a representative snapshot of the company at the time it was filed. So having those two pieces of information together can be very powerful. The investor gets the recent information available as well as the history of the reference data changes in the global LEI system and the snapshot of what the firm looked like at a certain point in time. Additionally, the LEI can be used for further downstream applications. So having that global open identifier, it ensures interoperability across data sources or data vendors. So for example, the LEI could be used to connect the figures in that annual financial report filing to, for example, metrics on ESG performance for a company. This could also be connected via vendor products to risk analysis or customer due diligence products. The key is having that open identifier gives the investor flexibility and, similar to what Anna said, a machine readable way of getting more information on the firm. So we take out the human element, which not only is costly, it also has room for error by making manual mistakes. So overall, firms can significantly streamline their further operations by leveraging the LEI in the report in this manner. We at Gleif, we focused on a different downstream application of having the LEI within that report, and that is an application in security. So in addition to filing the Gleif 2019 report in the SF reporting requirements, we also signed our annual report with the executive officer's digital certificates for Gleif. And what does that mean? Well, as you can see here from the snapshot on the slide, you see that it is 2 individuals from Gleif who have signed this particular document. One is our CEO, Stefan Wolf, and the other is the chairman of our board, Gerard Hartzink. You see all of that linked, importantly, to the LEI. So the LEI is not only embedded within the financial filing, it's also embedded within signatures of our executive officers. Additionally, you'll notice here there are a few additional signatures. Those are our third-party audit firms, or our third-party audit firm, E&Y, which prepared and signed off on our financial filings. So what does this enable a user to do? First, the user can verify that this report comes from Gleif, regardless the source of the report. So certainly a user could pull this report from Gleif's website, and then you have the assurance that it's a Gleif published report. You know our website is protected, so only content coming from our organization can be found on it. But let us say, for example, you download the report from ESMA's website. Well, how do you know that this truly is the report prepared and published by Gleif? That digital certificate with our executive officers gives you the ability to know this indeed comes from individuals within the organization that have the authority to verify and sign off on a report. Second, you can also automate the validation of the document. So by parsing that certificate, you can pull out the LEI, and you can also compare that to the LEI that is found in that financial filing. So you know not only has this document been digitally signed, it's been digitally signed by individuals that play an authorized role within the organization that matches to the filing, the financial filing within the report. And what I'd like to highlight here is the automation. So all of this can be done in an automated manner. As Anna already highlighted, the SF reporting requirements allow a user to unlock much more value by machine readability in the financial filing. Adding on this additional layer of security unlocks even more value. So again, an entirely automated process. A recipient of the report can parse the certificate, know it's a valid report, link it to the LEI in the financial filing, and then read in the rest of the information within that report. Overall, we feel this is a very powerful demonstration of how a regulatory requirement with the LEI helps to benefit investors. And then you can add on one additional layer, that is the security, using the LEI to greatly enhance the value and the overall product that is produced. With that, Andrew, I will stop and hand back to you for questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Claire and Anna. Clearly, this is a subject that is resonating with our audience. We have a number of quite detailed questions for you. So let me kick off with first one. What about instances where the LEI has lapsed? How does that impact its inclusion in the annual report?
Certainly. So for participants that may not be aware, the LEI comes with reference data, including an indicator of the registration status. Lapsed indicates that there has not been a recent update. So the last update to the record was more than 1 year ago. And it's ultimately a user beware flag. So there's no guarantee that the reference data is out of date, but you also don't know if the LEI and its associated reference data have been revalidated recently. So that can be used as an indicator in a few ways. Clearly, at the time of the filing of the financial report, you would expect that LEI to be in a good status, but over time, that could change. So either it causes you to have concern about the validity of the associated reference data, or perhaps that the operating status of the company has changed. But a user can use it as an indicator to look deeper into the company, look deeper into what is the status of this organization, and perhaps even raise some internal flags regarding the desire to invest, the desire to look further into the particular entity.
Very good, thank you. Next question. Where will SF annual financial reports be stored and made accessible to users?
Thank you, Andrew. I think that's for me. So the current requirements for annual financial reports and the submission process will not change because of the coming into force of the ESEF. Therefore, the existing processes whereby issuers submit the annual financial reports to their national competent authorities will remain unchanged compared to today. This means that as of today, or as of 2021, ESEF reports will be stored at national level within platforms called the officially appointed mechanisms. However, for those of you who may be interested, it may be good to know that the European Commission has recently launched an action plan to deepen the Capital Markets Union. And number one action in this action plan regards the development of a single access point via which investors and users of all sorts will be able to access companies' regulated information, and that will of course include ESEF annual reports. Now the timeline for this is not, it won't be immediate. It will take probably a few years to develop, but detailed legislative proposals are expected for end of next year already.
Very good, and actually the second part to that question was, I think, addressing exactly that. Is there any plan to develop a single platform at EU level, a kind of EDGAR for the European? That sounds like what you're talking about.
Indeed, yes. There is a plan that the European Commission is currently developing, and we hope that will see the light in not too long.
Very good. Another forward-looking question. Given how significant non-financial reporting is becoming for investors, are there any discussions around introducing machine readability for issuers' sustainability disclosures? ESG was a big topic for us yesterday. Sustainability becoming more and more important. Is it on your radar at all?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it is within the radar of the European Commission again, who's currently in the process of establishing how the non-financial reporting directive should be revised. And some of the questions asked in that consultation point to an intention, or at least an understanding of the needs of users for machine readability, also of sustainability disclosures. ESMA has highlighted in that in its response to that consultation that indeed the ESEF would be an appropriate framework for that machine readability to be introduced, since the entire annual financial report also includes the management report, which is where sustainability disclosures are currently being provided. And therefore, provided that Europe comes to a stronger non-financial reporting directive and to set standards for disclosures, then I think machine readability for sustainability disclosures will not be too far into the future.
Very good, thank you. And then final question, I think this one is probably for you, Claire. Let's see, and I think you've sort of addressed this, but let's just reiterate. You mentioned the digital certificate is given to the executive signatories of GLIFE. How can we be sure that these people are the authorized signatories for GLIFE?
Indeed, so currently that information is available usually in a business registry, but there are enhancements envisioned for the standard that represents the LEI. So there is an ISO standard, it's ISO 17442, for those that are interested. And it was recently updated, maybe now about 4 to 5 months ago. And it was expanded to include a role identifier. So we are working closely right now with ISO to understand the implementation of that and what is needed. Our first vision or discussions are pointing to the development of a jurisdiction level reference code list. So understanding for each jurisdiction around the world, what are legally recognized roles within a company. So in the example demonstrated, that would have been the CEO and the chairman of the board, and supplementing the LEI to include also the role, and possibly in the future, depending upon how some of the development goes with some of our other digital identity management products, to also include information on individuals that is publicly discoverable. So for example, as I mentioned, if you were to look into, in our case, the Swiss Commercial Register, you would find indeed our CEO and our board chairman listed as open public information. So it seems like a natural addition to add on to an open public system for the legal entity identification. But our first stepping stone is to put in place this role identifier within the LEI.
Very good. Okay. I think that basically addresses all the questions we've had. So that's much appreciated. And with that, all that's left for me to do is to thank Claire and Anna for their contribution today. Thank you. Thanks both.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Okay. That 2 hours has flown by. It is 5 o'clock London time, which means we are out of time. So it's for me to wrap up today's proceedings. Thanks to all our sponsors and contributors today, our panelists and presenters. It's been a great session. I know that you're ready for more tomorrow. Tomorrow's theme will be improving KYC, AML, financial crime compliance with RegTech. Same time, same place. It's 10 a.m. start in Eastern, 3 p.m. start in London. I look forward to welcoming you all back then. So we'll see you tomorrow. Many thanks and goodbye.